Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today for another Public Service Perspectives presentation this semester. For those I have not met, I'm Mackenzie Kaharski. I am the Special Projects Coordinator at the Voinovich School. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I do just have our typical housekeeping items to cover real quick. If you could please keep your microphone muted throughout the session just to avoid any disruptions, but please feel free to use the chat to communicate throughout as well. You can drop your questions in the chat during the presentation. We'll be addressing those at the end. When we open up Q&A, you can either continue to use the chat to submit questions, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and we will call on those with their hands raised to unmute yourself. The last thing to note is the session is being recorded today, and we will add this to our YouTube for those who cannot attend or those that want to refresh themselves on the presentation. Before we turn it over to our speaker, does anyone have any announcements or upcoming events they'd like to address? Welcome you to share at this time. Well, I do want to share that Monday kicks off Women Entrepreneurship Week. It is a global movement that Ohio University proudly participates in every year. We have some really great events and workshops, both in person and virtually, coming up. So I would love to see you all at those events. I'll drop a link in the chat so that you can learn more about those. But if anyone else has any other upcoming events to share, please feel free to unmute yourselves. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Director of Environmental Programs, Jen Bowman. She will be introducing our speaker today, Heather Raymond.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And I really am excited to have Heather here today. Heather was my TA when I was in the geology department, and this is going back just a couple years. Yeah, and is a grad, did her master's with the public administration program at Voinovich School. So I am excited to have her here to talk about her work at Ohio EPA and her transition to the Ohio State University as well. So Heather Raymond is the Water Quality Initiative Director for the Ohio State University's College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences. In this role, she helps coordinate applied interdisciplinary water quality research that addresses the need of local, state, and federal partners and integrates research findings into extensive outreach. Prior to accepting her position at OSU, Heather served as the State of Ohio Harmful Algal Bloom, HABs, as we like to call them, coordinator, where she led development of the nation's first public water supply HAB monitoring and reporting rules, assisted lake managers and water systems, and the response to HABs, conducted applied research on HAB treatment in coordination with US EPA and university partners, and taught webinars and workshops on HAB response. She serves on the National HAB Committee and Great Lake HABs Collaborative Steering Committee, and is contributing author to state, federal, and international HAB guidance. She has over 20 years of experience of water quality related government experience and earned master's degrees in both science and public administration from Ohio University. So welcome, Heather, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen and Mackenzie. First of all, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person. I know with COVID, everything's a little crazy, but I would have loved to be able to go out with everyone afterwards for lunch at Casa or maybe a beer at Jackie O's. But I already talked to Jen about perhaps coming out for some other events in the future, because I love interacting with students and the faculty and learning more about what you guys do. And I do miss my alma mater, so it'd be great to come back at some point in the future. But first, I wanted to share a little bit about me, just to give you some perspective of where I'm coming from. It's a love of the outdoors, especially water, that drew me to a career in the natural sciences. I lived within walking distance of Lake Erie and love spending time at the lake, but also grew up with those stories of the burning river and the dead lake. So I was, really cognizant of the fragility of these resources, but also that, restoration was possible. And it really helped kind of feel who I was and what kind of my environmental ethics were. Kind of an idealist and dreamer, I still am. I came from a working class family. I was a first generation college student at OU. Very grateful for being accepted into the honors tutorial college in chemistry on a near full scholarship. Loved OU, loved work. But at the end of my first year, we toured the Ohio EPA chemistry lab. And after talking to the staff who really never seemed to see the light of day and live for their instruments, I quickly realized that was the wrong path for me. So I came back, changed majors, went into geology, and immediately started bugging some of the professors about an undergrad research project. I thought that was really important. And one finally relented, said he needed some help with arthropod fossils. Not my real idea of excitement, but I put my nose to the grindstone, counted thousands and thousands of fossils. And at the end of the quarter, that professor invited me to go to Greece and learn where those fossils came from and do some paleoclimatic research out in Greece. So amazing opportunity. If you ever get the opportunity to do research abroad, I'd highly recommend it. It kind of was a life-changing experience for me. The next year, the government of Greece invited us to come back and present our findings at a Mount Olympus symposium. And had to give presentation. First presentation ever was in front of a nationally televised audience with the president of Greece in attendance. And so it was, very scary, but amazing opportunity. One of the things that I drew from that was when the government was presenting water. That was the big theme, water scarcity, water quantity, water quality. And I realized that this is a pressing issue, not just in the US, but abroad. So I came back and decided to pursue a master's in hydrogeology. Loved OU, they offered me a full ride. So decided to stay here. Borrowed a drill rig from the Department of Engineering that was broken, learned small engine repair, fixed the drill rig, and installed a whole bunch of monitoring wells out in the floodplain around campus, looking at impact of a potential tertiary wastewater treatment plant on the public water supply for the city of Athens, did a modular model and some other things. But also I was like, what am I going to do with my life? So I thought maybe working for the EPA might be a good opportunity for me. So I went to the Logan office and said, hey, do you have any volunteer opportunities? And they said, well, we have summer internships. I'm like, well, I've got like 2 days a week off, could I just come in and work for you guys? And they're like, sure, unpaid. If you want to do that, that's wonderful. So I went in, volunteered, and they had me doing, data entry, cleaning closets, probably doing stuff OSHA-wise I wasn't allowed to do. Got me out in the field a couple of times. But it really, made me realize this is something that I think would be fun and something I want to do. So the next summer, I applied for one of those fun college internships and got a call back for an interview for a full-time position. I didn't apply for a full-time position. And apparently what happened was the managers in the Southeast District Office forwarded my internship application to central office because they were looking for a strong geology candidate. And they said, hey, this girl's a hard worker, give her a shot. So I interviewed, got the position, and then ended up finishing up my master's while working full-time at Ohio EPA. So when you're thinking about a career, I do recommend looking at the potential employer's mission and goals to see if they align with your values. For me, Ohio EPA was a great fit. While I was at Ohio EPA, something that became more of a personal goal for me was to always champion data-driven policy decisions. And I'll spend most of this talk discussing 2 examples of data-driven program development at Ohio EPA, but I'll also touch on a few of my newer OSU projects and end with some thoughts on additional public service opportunities. So one of the interesting things I did not know prior to my Ohio EPA job was how much flexibility states have in implementing nationally mandated programs. When I first started, the Safe Drinking Water Act had just passed, and we were tasked with delineating drinking water source protection areas for all of our public water systems within the state. We had about 1,000 of those. And my boss came to me and said, hey, you just did a mod flow thesis. What do you think? How should we do this? And I knew that that approach was very time and data intensive and that there'd be no way we could do that for 1,000 water systems throughout the state, but I wanted to do something more than just a standard circle around a well that wasn't going to be defensible in court. So I had learned about this new analytic element modeling approach, did some research, and contacted the developer of the program and said, do you think this is appropriate? Do you think this is something we could apply in Ohio? And he said, yeah, this is exactly why we developed this program. Gave me a little training manual on it. I taught myself the program. and then did some comparisons where we had mod flow models already developed for an area. I did the analytical element model and saw how close they were. Were these a good comparison? Is this going to be a good approximation? And then had some good data, some good results. So went back to Hank Heichema, the developer of the program, said, hey, can you do training for our staff? He came in, he gave a nice uniform training. We came up with some standard input parameters for when we lacked site-specific data. And then we did some comparisons where multiple staff did the same delineation for the same public water system, so we can see how much variability we would get if using this approach. Everything looked great, so we decided to move forward with that modeling approach. And a point of pride for me is that just a couple of years ago, the state of California contacted me and said, hey, I saw that publication you put in the Journal of Groundwater about Ohio's approach to using this analytical element modeling. And we're thinking about doing this now because our protection areas are getting going to court and we're losing them, and we want something more scientifically defensible. So these have really stood the test of time. So my boss thought, hey, this is great. We got a great approach. I'm like, well, I don't think it's going to work for karst areas. So for those who aren't geologists in the areas, when you think karst, it's more like your sinkholes, your caves, things like that, where water can move really fast. And so these protection areas, we thought were undersized if we weren't using, using this analytic element modeling approach. So I said, I think water is flowing really fast in some of these areas, and we need a much bigger protection area to safeguard the public in these areas. So I said to my boss, he's like, I don't think it's fast. It's fast. It's fast. It's not fast. And I said, well, we won't know until we have data. Let me do some dye traces. Let me go out and measure what the flow rates are, and then we know who's right or whose idea is correct. So again, consulted with experts, found out the folks at US EPA who were the leaders on this, went down to Kentucky, talked to them and how they do dye traces, looked at the guidance. Ohio is very different. We don't have these big caves and systems, but we figured out a way to make it work. We did a series of like 6 or 7 dye traces and ended up measuring the fastest groundwater flow rates ever in Ohio. And we confirmed that even in some of these areas in Northwest Ohio that don't have significant topography, we're still getting really fast flow. And so that changed our approach, and it made us delineate much bigger protection areas in those areas. So overall, our state delineation policy was based on the results of these investigations and resulted in defensible drinking water source protection areas that were then tied to local and state laws. So when they came up in court or we had a siting prohibition, we could say, no, we really feel that this area needs to be protected. You shouldn't site in this location. So some lesson learned, I guess, there are, consult experts, collect data, and repeat. Let's see. Oh, no. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I can see you guys and advance my slides. So this is just a picture of one of these towns. This is the city of Gibsonburg. No caves, no big sinkholes, but very close limestone to the surface. These are up in the northern side, some quarries. We injected the dye where that green words are. There's public drinking water wells to the south, and then we found dye everywhere in these quarries, in the monitoring wells, in the public water supply wells. And we could figure out what the ambient flow was based on time it took the dye to get to the quarries, and then what flow rates were under induced conditions when the public water system wells were pumping. We did the whole thing for, I think, less than $500, all 6 traces, made all of our own equipment, made all of these little things out of paper clips and dye. And I had to buy dye, which is like $200, but that was probably the most expensive part of the test. So very frugal. When you're at the state agency, you don't have a lot of funds to do this type of work. And that's just some of the results of that, background data, and then we saw the dye come through at these different locations. So transitioning to somewhat different example of program development. In 2009, Ohio EPA received the results from a USGS National Lakes Assessment. And it showed that some Ohio recreational and public water supplies had high concentrations of cyanotoxin called microsystems. This was very different than past areas because there were no federal toxin guidelines. There were, these are unregulated contaminants. They're naturally occurring. They're created by cyanobacteria, but it's usually when you have eutrophic conditions, so high nutrient loads to a system that can help swing and create these blooms. And microsystems weren't just the only toxin that were created. There's also saxitoxins, there's rhopsin, and toxin A, so a suite of toxins that can be that can come from these blooms. We have very limited occurrence data, except for the USGS study. There are no federal drinking water maximum contaminant levels, no federal health advisory levels, no recreation advisory levels or guidance, no monitoring requirements, and limited data on whether or not public water systems could actually remove this if they were challenged by it. The only thing we did have was a World Health Organization guideline, that's for microsystems only. And that was because in other areas of the world, like Australia and Brazil, people had become ill, acutely ill, and there were some deaths associated with exposure to these contaminants. So we knew it was a potentially serious issue. So in 2010, Ohio EPA began incident response-based HAB sampling at public water supplies. And before I go there, I should state that my boss at the time thought this was mainly a recreational concern. They thought that it was a recreational exposure problem. They thought, we're not a third world country. We have good treatment. We think our treatment will be capable of removing these toxins. And we'll never see issues in the old Lake Erie water system because there's so much dilution in the lake as large as Lake Erie. This is just not going to be a problem. So again, I had to fight. I had to say, these are very visual blooms. And, the public sees green, gross water. They know that's where the drinking water comes from. They want to know if it's safe. So at least let us sample and confirm that the drinking water is safe. So after that, we did this incident response-based sampling. So when we saw a bloom, we sampled at both our state park beaches, and our lab also established a method because there's no standard method for detecting microsystems. At that time, an inland public water system did have a finished water microsystem detection. Thankfully, it was below that WHO standard, so we didn't have to issue an advisory, but it showed that, hey, toxins can break through treatment. This might be an issue. We need to continue to sample our public water supply. So Ohio EPA worked with our sister agencies at the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Health over the winter in 2010 and developed the state's first Ohio HAB response strategy. And we also established sanotoxin thresholds for finished drinking water and recreational waters, which were then released in spring of 2011. In 2012, those strategies were separated. So we now have a recreational strategy and a drinking water response strategy. And now it's just to better clarify our approach to our various stakeholders and make everything clear what numbers went with what exposure. The strategies were regularly updated based on best available information, following an adaptive program management. This is really important for unregulated contaminants when there's no federal guidelines and the science is evolving. In 2013, we experienced our first finished drinking water microsystem threshold exceedance at a pretty small Lake Erie public water system, and an advisory was issued. Now, you didn't hear about this in the news, and it didn't receive much media attention, mainly because the system was able to quickly transition to an emergency connection with a neighboring public water system. So they stopped using their water, they used the emergency source, but it was over, I think, 2 weeks before they could transition back to their drinking water. So they're actually without a safe source for 2 weeks. Until those levels declined and then we could optimize their treatment. So this was a pretty big wake-up call for us. And after that, we said, hey, we need to start offering some additional grant funding for our water systems to help be able to better prepare to deal with these. In 2014, another much larger Lake Erie public water system, Toledo, experienced a finished drinking water microsystem detection above our threshold. A do not drink advisory was issued. Water was trucked in from neighboring areas, and the press coverage was international. Both state and federal legislators called for action, and it was a big deal. We also had our first finished drinking water saxitoxin detection. So we realized that it's not just microsystems that are plaguing our water systems, and we have to look more at what other contaminants might be breaking through treatment. I want to see you in advanced slides, it's tricky. So US EPA responded to this federal call for action by finally developing federal health advisory levels for microsystems and cylindrosmopsin, which then Ohio EPA quickly incorporated into our revised strategy. And then that summer, we had finished water microsystem detections at 5 different public water systems, including multiple systems on Lake Erie. It was a rough summer. Also in 2015, Ohio Senate Bill 1 passed, and Senate bills are based on the order in which they're introduced. So Senate Bill 1 showed the priority of our legislature and how they placed on dealing with this issue. And that legislation provided the authority for Ohio EPA to develop HAB monitoring and reporting rules. So before that, we were kind of all this voluntary response, incident response, voluntary actions, but now we actually had the authority to write some rules. So we held numerous outreach and engagement sessions and greatly accelerated our normal rulemaking process to be able to get these rules in place prior to the next summer typical bloom season. These new rules, which were probably the fastest, I can't say for sure, but I'm willing to bet they're the fastest new rules to ever come out of our agency, went into effect on June 1st of 2016. We updated our strategies to incorporate the new rules and develop new guidance on treatment to further assist our public water systems. We also incorporated a treatment technique requirement into our rules, which were critical for preparing them to respond to HABs, so a more proactive approach, and be able to remove elevated cyanotoxins in their source water. Now, we've continued to have finished water detections in microsystems and also saxitoxins, cylindrosporopsin, and anatoxin A, but thankfully we've not had to issue drinking water advisories since the rules went into effect. I think this is due in large part to our use of our avoidance strategies, or quickly being able to implement treatment optimization strategies and make sure that even if the source water has microsystems, the treatment plant is able to remove them. So I'll touch on some of the science behind our guidance and rules and how we develop those next. So after the Toledo water crisis, our microsystem analysis methods, go back to my chemistry background, came under a lot of scrutiny. And the literature on comparative method of analysis was very thin. Many of our water systems said this was a false positive. This wasn't really a true detection. And so since no universities in Ohio had established cyanotoxin methods, and SUNY and UC Davis were notoriously slow, I worked with the only commercial lab in the country running these types of complex analyses to develop a method comparison study. So what we did was we took our archive samples and ran them under a whole suite of different analysis methods. And now, the ELISA method we were using, plus a whole bunch of methods that were very labor intensive and time consuming and expensive, but kind of give us the gold standard, what is really in this water. So some of the main findings were the methods many of our water systems wanted to use, this LCUV method, was prone to both false positives and negatives. So we said, hey, in the rules, we can't use this method. This is inappropriate and it will lead to confusion. We also found, and this was pretty interesting, is US EPA's draft new method for microsystems underestimated total microsystems and produced numerous false negatives. And that's because it gets into the chemistry, but microsystems are actually a suite of over 140 different variants. And the ELISA method we use can detect all of them because they're looking at a portion of the molecule that's consistent among all those different variants, whereas the US EPA method was more precise at just 10 of the variants. So it was only looking at maybe 10% of what the total microsystems might be or the total human exposure could be. So we were able to demonstrate that the ELISA method we are using was more protective of human health since it did not underestimate those total concentrations. And in the right panel, you see this, we had R squared of 0.983 when we compared our ELISA method to some of those really critical gold standard methods that are a little more expensive and time consuming. So we felt confident that we could stand behind the methods we developed. We actually provided testimony on these findings to US Congress, and then US EPA began a rigorous evaluation of this new ELISA method and eventually adopted Ohio's SOP into a national analysis method and included ELISA analysis in their upcoming unregulated contaminant monitoring rule national monitoring program the following year. So a lot of data here. We had a lot of data to support requiring that routine microsystems monitoring. But the other cyanotoxins I've briefly mentioned were less common, but still potential concern. I mean, saxitoxin is a potent neurotoxin, kills hundreds of people a day through marine exposure. So we said, we can't ignore this. So most of our lake managers and us, in fact, in the past, had relied on something called cyanobacteria cell counts, where you actually look under a microscope and count all these cyanobacteria. And then if there's anything that's potentially capable of producing one of those other toxins, then that would trigger monitoring for those other toxins. But the problem was we almost always had some of those cyanobacteria in our samples, but we rarely detected the toxins. So we needed a better tool. So luckily I was at a NSF conference and I learned of a new qPCR based molecular screening tool, and that had been developed out of Australia. I talked to the developer and said, hey, can we, if I give you some samples, can we run them and see what we find? So we tested on some of these archive samples and the results look great. But we're in rule development phase, and I didn't want to include these other methods, but this was a newer method, so I was hesitant to include it to rules since I didn't have a lot of data to evaluate. So what we ended up doing was requiring water systems to sample and rule. So they had to collect a sample, but Ohio was going to do the analysis for free in the first year. And then we also paired that analysis with pool toxin analysis to kind of see how well those things compare. And the results are presented on this slide, goes into a lot of detail, but basically whenever we had microsystems in high concentrations, we also had the genes. It's funny now with COVID, you think about qPCR as the gold standard method for detecting COVID, but at the time, people hadn't heard a lot about qPCR. It wasn't used as much in environmental monitoring. So it seemed, my boss had said, we can't be on the cutting edge of technology or the tip of the spear. I'm like, if we're not, we're just going to fall behind. So I was really pushing this new technology. And we found a way to incorporate into rules with some flexibility in mind so that we could change our approach if the data didn't support use of the method into the future. So that was kind of a very unique way that we had to navigate the rulemaking process to give us that flexibility, but it turned out working quite well. And this is just another example of that comparison data, and having this information just really helped us demonstrate to our water systems and the public why this brand new qPCR approach was superior to the traditional methods that had been used in the past. And I won't go into details, they're not as important as the approach. Test new methods before adopting them, compare to the existing methods when possible. Ohio EPA's guidance and treatment technique rule requirements were also based on applied research. In many cases from studies completed at Ohio Water Systems by Ohio EPA and others. The Ohio Department of Higher Education funded 12 treatment-related applied research projects. And I'm negligent I think I didn't mention this in the prior slide, but following the Toledo crisis, the Department of Higher Education came to Ohio EPA and DNR and said, what do you need? And they went with a targeted call for applied research projects. And so I'm very happy that many of the universities stepped up and helped fill in some of these information gaps for us. So partnerships are critical. You can't do it all yourself. We funded 12 treatment-related applied projects. Ohio EPA also worked with US EPA on 4 HAB-focused comprehensive performance evaluations at Ohio Water Systems that were prone to HABs. We completed multiple carbon jar test experiments, oxidation hold time experiments within our lab. And we also collected treatment train data during major HAB events. So if someone was having a finished water detection, we collected data all through the plant to see where was it being removed, where was treatment failing. So as I mentioned previously, this focus on improving the drinking water treatment capacity as a prevention tool has really helped us avoid drinking water advisories into the future and protect human health. And this was something that was pretty unique and hasn't been done. And again, these are the first rules in the country for this. So I think they've stood the test of time, and I think they've worked quite well. I forgot to include this, just another example of one of our experiments. We evaluated microsystems and sex tax removal from Ohio source water at 3 different carbon doses. And one of the reasons we did this is water systems were saying, hey, we're using this book value, and it's saying we only need 5 milligrams per liter of carbon, and that's going to remove all our microsystems. But we put 5 milligrams per liter of carbon into our treatment, and we had a finished water detection. What's up? So we said, okay, let's dig into this. So one of our important findings was that the amount of chemical needed to remove the toxins was much, much higher than the dose estimates provided using published experimental data. And that's when we dug into it, is because the published experiments were generally conducted using toxin and pure water. Well, that's not reality. It's not actual bloom material. So we were testing the actual source that had all this additional biomass, total organic carbon, dissolved molecules. It provided more challenge to that chemical to do the treatment. So we made a policy that you have to have the capacity to feed more chemical, and this required many water systems to upgrade their plants so they could apply additional doses of chemicals, but then be better prepared to remove them. So if there was a elevated problem or a harmful algal bloom in their source water, they would be able to just up their dose and be able to not have a finished water detection. And this is just one example of that research. And I think, I've talked a lot about Lake Erie, but I should mention that, the city of Cadiz, Campbell, there are small water systems in Southeast Ohio that have experienced HABs. And then, of course, there's the Ohio River HAB that was kind of more in your neck of the woods. And I guess 2 points here is, one is during our rulemaking, we actually had the water systems, or several of the water systems that were located on the Ohio River and other rivers said, we should not be subjected to these HAB monitoring and reporting rules because we are on rivers and they are free from HABs. And we had a couple of examples where rivers were experiencing harmful algal blooms that we pointed to, but they're like, oh, those are tiny rivers. Those aren't the Ohio River. We'll never see something on the Ohio River. Well, that's like, spitting in Mother Nature's face, because that while we were writing the rules, we had this massive harmful algal bloom on the Ohio River. And so from a fun, interesting policy standpoint, I guess, I started getting calls from water systems. Hey, we're starting to see something that's looking kind of green at our intake. And I was putting the dots on the map, and I ran to my chief's office and said, I think we have a river-wide bloom. And this is before it, hit the media, any attention. And I said, well, how would you know? I'm like, well, you'd have to do an aerial survey. You'd have to get up in a helicopter or a plane and just fly and see what you could see. And he's like, okay. And he's like, this is after Toledo. So a lot of apprehension about HABs. So he called me back in half hour. He's like, you're getting on a helicopter tomorrow morning. We're flying out of Columbus. We're going to do from Marietta to whatever, take whatever you need to document, take cameras, pictures, anything else. If we have to land and collect a sample, we will. And so we flew that, and it was remarkable. It was a solid bloom almost from Marietta straight to Cincinnati. And so then we started raising the alarm and notifying the water plants in West Virginia and others and saying this is going to be an issue. So could go on a lot about that, but it's kind of like trusting your gut. If you start to see dots on a map, you realize that this could be a river-wide bloom, investigate it, follow up. Whoops, sorry, I went past one. So another thing that I barely had a chance to highlight on was just the education out piece component of public service. I can't tell you how many hundreds of webinars I've given to our public water systems, our interested stakeholders, talks on rules, talks on treatment, talks on methods, making sure that they understand the issue, the problem, how to address it. We also led these 2-day workshops, in-person workshops at Stone Lab every year from 2010. We had to take a hiatus due to COVID, but to get our public water systems and others out there, and then led regional meetings to US EPA. Our data, as I mentioned, has informed national policy, but this is just one of those workshops. And and in here we have someone from Oregon, the Oregon Public Health Authority. We had someone from New Jersey. We had someone from DC, and plus a whole bunch of water treatment plant operators, to learn more. So I think, kind of it's your responsibility to make sure that as you're getting this information, that you're giving it back to the public, and you're making sure it's transparent and it's understood, and you present it in a variety of different options. So that way, they're better informed and able to deal with the issue at hand. So transitioning to OSU. So I will say that I honestly didn't think I was qualified to be the Ohio State University Water Quality Initiative Director, since I didn't have a PhD. I have two masters from OU, great, tons of experience, but it was really the fifth colleague who forwarded the position to me and said, with the tagline, you'd be perfect for this. When I said, okay, I guess it's worth throwing my hat in the ring. And I guess the lesson there is, don't undervalue yourself and your experience. Just because you might not have a PhD doesn't mean you don't have a lot of things to share. So this has been a wonderful opportunity for me. As I think I showed on the first slide, again, I looked at OSU. The mission of our college is we sustain life, because it's ag and environmental sciences. And then the goal of this water quality initiative really aligned again with my personal values. So I thought this is something that I could do well. So in this role, I help to coordinate interdisciplinary research projects, address both local, state, and national needs, and even work on a few international projects. I also help connect researchers to our network of water quality extension associates and county educators to help better integrate on-farm trials. Again, this is on the nutrient reduction side, and local watershed studies with our faculty-led projects, and then help faculty translate their research findings out to get to those stakeholders. We have a few projects that involve multiple universities, federal state agencies, municipal partners, NGOs, and really helping build those relationships to solve these wicked system problems like harmful algal blooms has been really fulfilling, even in just the couple of years I've been there. And so this is just an example. We have 6 water quality extension associates, and they have worked in all, I think, 30 some counties in the Maumee Basin, doing we put in some real-time monitoring at the drinking water intake for the city of Delphos, because this water system was impaired due to nitrates and cyanotoxins. This is testing some new equipment that could analyze for nitrate and a dissolved reactive phosphorus, so that you can sample them every hour. So you can get hourly data, post it to a online platform, and really kind of see what's happening with these storm events. Did flow monitoring, so we could calculate loads. This is an output from something called the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework. It helps land use planners understand where on the landscape are different conservation practices, especially structural practices, suitable for implementation. And these folks are really working on the nutrient side. How do we reduce nutrients so that HABs are less prone to develop within the lake or within some of these smaller reservoirs that are impacted in Northwest Ohio? And again, the education outreach side. We also do drones. We flew over 150 drone flights trying to, again, connect some of our producers to this cutting edge technology, access to data so they can visualize where yields are. They can do different type of yield mapping in the field, see the impact of conservation practices, and help kind of better tell that story, or know where to focus some of their nutrients, or do precision agriculture. So some work there. And then these guys just won a national award for the Water Quality Wednesday workshops. I was really excited about that. It was a national extension award for just high quality outreach and education. So we did a winter webinar series, and you got a lot of producers and stakeholders involved in that. So sharing what we're learning. This is one example of an interdisciplinary project. I helped coordinate. It's looking at the efficacy of algicides and novel ozone nanobubble technology on prevention and management of HABs. When I was at Ohio EPA, all the time, we're like, we have the silver bullet, this beetle enzyme, or this, whatever nanobubble, or this hydrodynamic cavitation. This is going to resolve HABs without having deleterious effects on non-target organisms. But we didn't have the capacity to check all that. We were just trying to basic, we need to understand treatment, we understand, methods. So we didn't have the capacity to fully vet those technologies. So now that I'm at OU, I was really excited, or OSU. I trade OU's campus for OSU's any day, by the way. But now that I'm at OSU, I am looking at, how can we answer these questions? So what was fun in my job is I was able to pull together this interdisciplinary team of researchers who had never worked together before. So but got, a geochemist, a fisheries person from our School of Environmental and Natural Resources, got a aquatic and HAB ecology person from Stone Lab, some engineers with experience in ozone and sonication from our College of Engineering. And then we kind of lacked someone that had a really good, molecular background. So some of the genomics, metagenomic work on, how these things are responding. So I brought in University of Florida and IFAS to help round out our team. So we also collaborated with US EPA Office of Research and Development, NOAA and NCOS, US Army Corps of Engineers, and some industry partners saying, what do you need? What do you think? How should we approach this problem? We presented this to Ohio EPA, DNR, Grand Lakes St. Mary's Restoration Commission, got our letters of support, and we developed a proposal that included lab experiments, mesocosm experiments, and full-scale field trials, because we knew we had to be able to scale this up for it to be able to be beneficial. And we received a 1.5 million harmful algal bloom control grant actually the money came in this spring, and we are already working on full-scale field trials. So it's been really cool and fun. And seeing the researchers who've never worked together before, seeing the chemists talk to the engineers, talk to some of the field people. The engineers had never been in the field. They're like, how do I wear waders? It was awesome. So and then getting people access to different labs, running samples across the campus and at StoneLab is just a really cool experience, because I think these big problems take people thinking about it at different levels and working together. So it's been great. There's some pictures from this summer. On the upper left is the gross bloom that was at the beginning of summer before we started treatment. That was in early June. And then just some pictures of us sampling in the units. And the cool thing with this technology is this was the first summer this lake did not have to issue a drinking or a recreational advisory for their beach or for their open waters. So there's still, I think, I'd hoped it would have worked even better. We're still trying to figure out dosing and making sure we're not adding too much to hurt, any Daphne or non-target organisms, but it showed a lot of promise. And so the Lake Owners Association that we were working with was incredibly happy and said that they're wanting to buy this. They're super excited. So some good preliminary data. And then shifting gears, kind of some final things. I would just want to say I found that volunteering to be very rewarding, especially if you have a career that might not initially align with your passion. You can find a volunteer opportunity to kind of be an outlet for that. And then you never know where those can lead and what other opportunities those can bring up. And also the state of Ohio does not permit employees to be involved in any partisan political activity, even during your free time. But issue advocacy is considered permissible if done off the clock. So volunteering for environmental organizations can get you involved in projects that can make a real difference, both locally and internationally, and kind of provide an outlet for that environmental advocacy, which is also important to me. It also helps expand your network, but that's, for me, a secondary benefit. I also like birds. I didn't mention that. I did bird count and banding with our local Audubon Center to help highlight the importance of our Scioto River as a migration corridor. And watching that change over time has been amazing. It evolved into restoring an old impoundment lot into a natural wetland area, and we established the nation's first urban Audubon Center in Columbus. We developed a conservation crew with local at-risk youth, many of whom are now college graduates working in the field. I almost get teared up when I talk about this. We also did cross-programming with local watershed groups, developed a partnership with groups in Guatemala, where some of our threatened birds overwintered, and we did advocacy work in DC. And I attended a service trip in the Philippines. It was on population health and the environment. That trip completely wrecked me and made me consider quitting my job and joining an international aid organization, because when you work in drinking water protection and you see conditions like the one in the kind of the middle, where that's a drinking water well, and it is like there's literally a pig living with the family in that little house right there. That's it's horrific conditions. But instead, this gives me a new sense of urgency in my advocacy work, and just many compelling stories to share with people like you. Like there are problems that are have seemed bad, but then you go to some other areas and you're like, wow, they are struggling even more. And trying to have that connection and do what you can to help promote the awareness is important. So many compelling stories to share. And I've also, like I said, served on some national committees, which has helped us, make sure that, other states are aware. Like I've worked with many other states on HAB issues because, Ohio was the first. So, why do they have to recreate the wheel? They should learn from our lessons. And, and to close, I think having a work-life balance is important. For me, it helped involve my kids in some of my applied research, at least the funner parts. And so when Toledo emergencies hit, things like that, I'm gone for 3 days straight. They don't see me. They know their mom's working on something important. So, but when I am together with them, trying to turn off the phone, my attention's focused on them, have some fun together outside and share my love of nature with them, help promote that moving forward. So I think for faculty and others, a lot of times you get so focused on your work, and your work is important, but, finding that balance is I think, key to just internal happiness for me. So to summarize, follow your passions. If you do that type of work, you're going to be much happier. You're going to do a better job engaging. Volunteer. You never know where those opportunities can lead. Don't go it alone. Every project I worked on, I reached out to numerous partners, learned what I could, dug into literature, It's also okay to make, you don't know something and ask for help. I was at a US EPA retreat once, and the presenter said, well, you can just run a jar test, and figure out some of this stuff. And everyone was like, okay. And I rose my hand, like, I have no idea what a jar test is or how to run it or what a jar test apparatus looks like. And they're like, really? They're like, who else here has never run a jar test? Every single hand in the room ran up. They're like, okay, let's talk about this. And it ended up, then that was something that Ohio EPA started to do routinely, was run these, quick experiments in tandem with treatment plants. And it really helped us. But if I had not asked that question, we would have never even got the equipment. So it's okay to feel like you look stupid, unless you're in Dr. Hines' class, but that's an inside joke with Jen. Data-driven policy decisions, document everything. You're going to be able to, when you go up for rules, you're going to get a million questions and you have to justify every one. If you have that documented, it's going to be much easier. Emerging issues, adaptive program management is key. Don't think you have, just because you have great data and this seems like the right approach now, tomorrow there might be a better way. So keep your mind open to those things. I'll make time for your family and say thank you. So I work with a ton of people, and I am greatly appreciative of how they've helped boost me up and help us become a better state and do better science. And so, just if you can, an email thank you. They've really helped you. Maybe a handwritten note, a gift card if it's really, really a lot of help. And it's just those things, I think, is just going to build those relationships. And a lot of times it doesn't cost anything on your end to be appreciative. But it really means so much. So with that, thank you for spending I think it's like beautiful 80-degree day. You left that to listen to my sordid tales of public service. So I appreciate you spending the time to listen to me. I will do one, kind of self-plug that, even though I think our main campus is pretty awful and you should avoid it if you can, compared to OU. Our Stone Lab is beautiful. So this is a picture taken from our Stone Lab campus. We offer summer courses and workshops that I'm sure you could get credit for. They have reciprocity with OU. And it's just a really small class setting, and it gets you out there. It gets you onto boats. It gets you using the different types of equipment and doing some fun applied research. There's also a lot of scholarships available for those. There's research education for undergrads. So there's positions where you could actually actively help with an ongoing research project and still take a class while you're up there. So it's one of the cooler things at OSU, and I'd invite you to come up and check us out. So that's all I have. And I can exit here. I can finally see all of you.
So much, Heather. Really appreciate it. If you want to go ahead, open it up for a discussion, open us up for questions. Feel free to use the raise your hand feature to unmute yourself. We'll call on you or drop some questions in the chat for Heather.
And I see there's some questions.
Jen has her hand raised physically.
Okay,
so
Jen.
You can also turn
This
your
is
cameras
how I
on.
raise my hand. Thank you so much, Heather. That was really a great presentation and a wonderful overview of, sort of the evolution of HABs that we hear so much about here, but just to see how things were unfolding at the very front edge and how you were tracking that, it was really, chronologically was, just awesome to see that. In terms of where you're starting to do some of your research now with OSU and looking at, and others are too, land management for the Western Lake Erie Basin and how to reduce HABs going into the lake. Do those same land management practices, BMPs, transfer to the Ohio River Basin? So when we look at, it's a much different agricultural landscape, it's much different terrain, it's a different ecoregion. What do you see the main differences are when we want to look at management practices in the watershed, on the ground, in the Ohio River Basin versus what's happening in Lake Erie Basin?
Topography. So yeah. They get a lot more sediment losses, a lot of potentially different challenges probably than we. A lot of the structural practices for reducing runoff and things like that are potentially going to be, I would think, more important. I would say some things are probably the same. If you have, we found that legacy phosphorus has been a big issue for us. And I would expect that if you have these areas where you have, and by that's where phosphorus concentrations have accumulated in some soils due to the land use over time, you're going to have much higher likelihood of runoff in general. I think these are all very generalizations, but I think identifying, those legacy phosphorus fields and things, and looking at some target action there. And of course, there's some challenges like we don't know how acid mine drainage or different pHs and things like that might affect some of these dynamics. I know, it's Caddis had pretty bad harmful algal blooms, but it's pretty much a forested watershed. So trying to figure out, well, where are the hot spots, or is it all internal nutrient loading? Is it the fact that at one time this wasn't forested and you had more maybe legacy phosphorus in the sediments within that reservoir, and that's acting as a source for the bloom. So it's complex. There's a lot of there's things I think that you could learn from, but there's also things that I think are going to be uniquely yours that you'd have to address. I think there's some cool opportunities there, though, that we might not have just because you have potentially, the topography and some of the things are different. I will say, just at the Western Lake Erie Basin Partnership meeting last week, and two of the big things that came out of research needs are effectiveness of BMPs. When are they working? When aren't they working? What are the soil conditions? Other things that might impact that, and legacy phosphorus fields, and then also impact of a changing climate. So how are these more intense spring storms impacting the ability for practices to be successful? Because in some cases, a practice might be successful if you only get 1-inch rain events, but if you're getting 4-inch rain events, it might not be sufficient.
And all that increased erosion and then more runoff. And so that, yeah, thank you.
Hey, Craig. So did I get on?
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Congratulations. So I'm very happy to see you at Ohio State. You've done extremely well. So congratulations. One follow-up to that question that Jen had. I would maybe you could talk a little about the mass balance that we have been expanding across the state of Ohio. There's the watershed in the Ohio River Basin is distinctly different than Western Basin, just in where those sources of nutrients are come from. So maybe that's one that comes to mind. And then my question for you is, adaptive management, you always heard me talk about, it's like building an airplane as it goes down the runway. And we're getting all of, and we were very, very good at, and we still are in bringing data to the forefront to answer some of these questions, but it's always a challenge translating that data to policymakers, legislators, and those in the General Assembly. So what's your thought about how to effectively take those scientists and that hard data, translating that into information that people that aren't familiar with that type of academic scenario, and present it with them in a way that they can feel confident and trust that information to make policy decisions when frankly, we don't have all the answers?
Yes, well, I want to say I could have done what I accomplished, through this program as a half pointer without the support of Mike Baker and Craig Butler, and the fact that they I think often said, "What is this harebrained idea Heather's coming up with?" I'm like, "Wait, no, let me get the data." And they were very supportive if we could get the data to show it would work, of taking that leap and doing that. So, and then they of course had the rougher job of saying, well, we're doing this thing called qPCR and our staff say it's good, to the General Assembly and to the folks, or to the governor's office, who of course is very involved with the harmful algal bloom issues. So I will say at OSU, one of the ways we're trying to do that is we have this new program called the Knowledge Exchange, and it's to address just that. I hear folks out of our agricultural research service talk, and it's a barrel of statistics about all these different practices and things. And I'm like, what does that mean? Even I'm like, if it's hard for me to figure it out, how is it going to be, something that a legislator or a farmer could use? So I think we're trying to get there and trying to find better ways to, have those scientists talk down to like our communicators and say, what's the easy, and sometimes you can't simplify it, but how can we simplify it and into the core message? And hopefully I wanted to include some science in this talk, because obviously there's students and others that are scientists, in this presentation. But, I give a very different talk to legislators. I give a very different talk to some of our, like my community stakeholders. I had, for that project, for the USAID's project, I had one presentation that we gave to US Army Corps of the status of a very different presentation that we gave to the Lake Owners Association about it. Now, if they want details, they want to see all those graphs, we provide them, but it's like kind of cut to the chase. What does it mean? So I think we need to all do a better job of that, because especially, me, I love data, I love science, and sometimes I forget, and you want, so it's like, I even need a filter on me, like, okay, Heather, even though I have done that role of communication, talking to someone else, like, do you understand this? A lot of times it's going to someone outside of your field and saying, can you read this? Or can you watch this little snippet? Does this make sense to you? And if it doesn't, like, I don't understand that term, or this, you talk too fast, or I also talk fast, so sorry. But that's a good way to take it to someone outside of your field and have them review it before you present it, just to kind of say, does this make sense? But it's a challenge, it's always been a challenge. And under, I'll say the Trump administration, that things, science and it was tough, and I think when we have our, at least when we have our administrators willing to listen, that's helpful. So, but I think if you go in, go in with that open mind, you can. Now, I will say, working with ag a lot more than I had, different role, EPA versus working with as part of the agricultural school. It has opened some doors, which is great. There's a little more trust there, but it's economics. So all the time, I'm like, how can we look at a practice? Yes, you can get H2 Ohio. That'll cover your costs for a couple of years. But how can we look at what either the economic benefits of that practice is, or the soil health, the kind of long-term soil fertility benefits of that practice are? How can we see it, improve the bottom line? And if we can sell them that way, then we're going to have long-term adoption of those practices. For things like phosphorus filters, or things that are going to be just kind of be there just to help improve the water quality, then it's like, how do we find incentives to pay for those things? Because those things, there's potentially no bottom line, no economic benefit, but there's the societal benefit that's needed. And that's where, can we have taxpayer money, other programs, NRCS things, pay for those things that aren't going to have that economic benefit to farmers. So putting in terms of money helps. And I will say also that the public administration degree, like before I started into HABS, I went for the online executive MPA, which was easier than the trying to navigate OSU, because it would have taken probably 4 years to go through OSU's MPA program. It was a wonderful program. And it told me that I really didn't want to be an administrator. I wanted to stay a scientist, but it also helped me look at things like, taking advantage of situations. There's no crisis that's not providing an opportunity. How can you turn it around and learn from it? So, and some of the other things, how do I talk to my boss or to Craig about the policies in a way that's going to help them see that benefit, or see how can I better communicate? So it was a wonderful complement to my my master's, my science degrees, to help me better understand how to navigate the policy side. So that's a great program. I'd recommend once you're in school and once you're in a job, take a break after a couple of years and go back and get that. That's fabulous program.
Thank you, Heather. Well, we're at 1 o'clock. I want to be conscious of time here and appreciate everyone spending the lunch hour with us. Heather, I thank you so much for giving this presentation today. I know this audience found a lot of value in the information you shared. So I want to thank you for your time, your contributions. Coming to talk to the school. We do hope to get you back in person and get you at CASA soon, though. So we will try to make that happen sometime in the near future. I do want to just pick a little plug for a save the date. Our next session is on November 5th. We'll get to hear from several of our students about their current research, some of them working in water initiatives, actually. So again, thank you, Heather, for sharing your time with us today. I do hope you all have a great weekend.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Bye-bye.
Nice.